Hi, I'm Christine Madera, and I'm here with Henry Sullivan, and we're here every other week to talk about all kinds of interesting things. And today, on the almost eve of the 250th anniversary of the United States, we're talking about what is the purpose of government. And so, in researching some of the ideas for this, an interesting one that I came across was we kind of have this idea that governing is about governing the people. But a contrast to that is governing as the purpose of government is to govern power. And when you think about now, we tend to go toward the government governing people because we've given away a lot of our power and invested it in our government. But originally, with the original founding of the United States and the Constitution, a lot of the thought that went into developing that was around the government governing power so that people could have a thriving, prosperous life. And so I know, Henry, you had a lot of ideas you wanted to jump in on with that. So why don't you pop in and we'll just start our conversation?
Well, I mean, yes, I love that idea of a government to govern power because right now it seems like that's our problem.
Hmm.
I've been watching, and an interesting thing about what I'm about to say is this notion of power that needs to be reined in. I'm seeing it basically everywhere. I mean, if you watch videos of conversations about politics and power, if you watch videos in the UK, in France, in Germany, in parts of Asia, they all kind of mention Elon Musk and Peter Thiel and the tech billionaires. They do focus on the power here in the United States that's been
Right. Yeah.
accumulated in the United States. And basically, I mean, I haven't heard many people talk about China or Russia as like global threats in the same way that they're talking about Elon Musk and Peter Thiel.
No, I mean, they're certainly on an AI level. They could certainly, pop right up on an AI level and begin to create some interesting power dynamics. But yeah, you're right. I mean, because the power is not just invested in government. With the United States, we have a large government. We've got a large country. There's a lot of global power invested along in the United States, along with finances. But a lot of the power is corporate power and the
That's right.
power of money. And the power of those interconnections, like what we saw with the Epstein files, like all of these interconnections of the very wealthy people who continue to, even if they disagree in public, support each other in private for the
Hmm.
purposes of maintaining the power structure. So yeah, I think that that's right to have a lot of videos out there and a lot of thought about, power not just coming from government, but power coming from these other structures as well.
Yeah, yeah. And so what tell me a little bit more about, like, you said that you kind of stumbled upon that notion because normally people when they talk about government, they talk about it in terms of governing people. And you said you stumbled upon this notion of the government was that the founding fathers had the need to govern power in mind. Did you find anything more about that? Anything useful in solving this or addressing this problem of billionaires in the United.
Well, I think because this was 18th century thought, they were creating the foundation of the United States for an 18th century
Right.
world. And so the way that money was accumulated and power was accumulated was different. And a lot of
Mhm.
that was invested in monarchies. And so, I mean, you had, like, if you think about the European system with monarchies and a lot of other countries having, dynasties, monarchies, imperial type of things, some sort of, divinely ordained leader, and then the infrastructure that held that leader. And then these people were basically landowners. They were farmers, they were entrepreneurial landowners. They were leaving this place where they were subject to the crown to come to a place where they wanted the freedom, basically economic freedom. The pilgrims wanted religious freedom, and in doing so, they wanted to put that freedom or their ideas on everybody else. And then these founders wanted economic freedom, and in doing that, enshrined the things that were most helpful to maintain their own economic freedom. But now, things are global; they're not just local. So or they're not even just national. So having this idea about, like, the government as something that arbitrates property and arbitrates arbitrates the finance system and arbitrates the tax system and things like that, built for us, the original founding, that now is a completely different animal. So we don't like they would didn't could never have this kind of system or world that we have now in mind. And trying to take those systems and apply it to our world has not really been working all that well.
Well, one thing that I want to do now because I had a little time to try to figure out this system a little better because we are streaming to Substack and Facebook and YouTube, and I actually got a comment here from someone, Anna Casper. And it
Oh, yeah.
says,
Hey, Anna Casper.
you're familiar with. It says,
Yeah.
"It is a mistake. It is a mistake to view the government and corporations as wholly separate and awesome and often antagonistic entities. Corporations should rightly be understood as private bureaus of the state."
Yeah. Though that
You
then
agree with that?
I will tell you, Anna Casper's got some really interesting ideas and thought, and is a wonderful person to follow. There was another idea that came up when I was looking at some of this, and it was the two ways generally that capital and government interact. And one is where capital controls the government, like in the United States, and one is where government controls capital, like in Iran. And so those are other ways of thinking about governments as well, that they are intertwined with the capital, the movement of capital within their structure, but then that are interactive with that in different ways. So one is capital controls government, the other is government controls capital. Neither of them work all that well, and neither of them necessarily work for the good of people. They work for the preservation of the system, whatever that system happens to be.
So is this statement kind of getting to the idea that, because I am guilty of what Anna Casper is actually saying in the sense that I normally do think of corporations as in sort of competition with, in some sense of the word, the government, the federal government at least. And so this last part, corporations should rightly be understood as private bureaus of the state. So it's basically this is the notion that, well, that's never actually been the case. You might have like some tweaks in terms of the laws and some tweaks in terms of regulation, but it's never actually the case that they're antagonistic. They're always working. I mean, they're always like part of the same whole. It's just that you should always sort of assume that. So how do we? So if you look at it that way, how should we think of like a Starlink, which just IPO'd the last week, or
SpaceX.
Palantir, or I mean, how should we think of these corporations? Because it feels as if the problem is that they have so much money. Like I kind of pointed out the last time we spoke, Citizens United was based on this notion. Actually, it's like a couple of different cases where the idea is that money is equivalent to speech, and what
Mhm.
that does is it makes it where you may have one vote as one human being, but a person who has a lot of money, a billionaire, actually has like an amplified vote because what they can do is they can do so much more with their money. And so in a situation like that, so what is this notion of corporations being private bureaus of the state? Like how does that help you deal with that problem?
I don't know if it helps you deal with the problem. I think it magnifies the problem, honestly, because I mean, especially from Citizens United, where it's basically much more obvious about how much business can and corporations can control policy and and who gets elected and government, and really make government its pawn. I won't use the other word that came to mind, but that makes government its pawn. So, and if you look at the way that they're interacting now, I mean, especially right now,
Mhm.
if you are favorable to the power structure now, you get all kinds of benefits. If
That's
you
right.
are antagonistic to that power structure now, you will get taken down, and you'll and punished with taxes, but, all kinds of different things, or have your, like with Anthropic, told, okay, so you have to take down, your entire flagship, whatever AI model that they had out there. And you could just arbitrarily do that. And before, it wasn't quite as arbitrary, or it was a leader or more behind the scenes and it wasn't quite in your face. But if you think about the beginning of the corporate structure, I mean, wasn't it back in the day, at least where our modern corporations are built on, like the Dutch East India Company? and what was the original one from England? And they were partnered with the monarchy to go out and make economic expansion on behalf of the monarchies. And so, they started out as charters as an extension of the government. And then in order to raise money, then they sold shares and all this stuff and kind of became the original structure of our corporate model now. But that was always very intertwined with government. And so I think if the government, at least in practice here, the government's part of their job really is to keep the economic engine running. And so they have to partner with corporations in order to do that. They don't necessarily do it out front, so that you can see it, but certainly behind the scenes and less so now where it's much more obvious whether you are in favor or out of favor. But it is a definite intertwining between the two,
Hmm,
I think.
okay. Well, I kind of see what you're saying. It's interesting because what we're talking about actually is kind of the kinds of things that I had in mind in writing Emperor,
Mhm.
which is, you're familiar with Emperor. The whole idea of the Council of Nobles is that you have this 13 member body, which is above the government. And so it's like a board of directors,
Yeah.
and these 13 members of the Council of Nobles, they're responsible for between 3 and 4 states, either 3 or 4 states of the United States. And what they do is they select the people who can run for office. So we can vote. It's just that, it's a situation where not anyone can just run for office. You have to get permission from the patriarch in your
Uh-huh.
domain to run for
Mhm.
office at every level. And for the president and the vice president, the patriarchs just basically nominate someone, and then it looks a lot like a presidential and vice presidential campaign does now. It's just that a patriarch from the East Coast might have nominated one candidate, and a patriarch from the Southwest nominated another one, and then they compete just like they do now. And so the line that I have in there to sort of explain how we wound up in a situation like that is people can vote for stupid reasons, but but their choices can't be stupid. Their choices have to be sane and competent. And so we give the people competent choices, and regardless of how educated or dumb they are, smart or dumb they have to choose amongst these what we consider to be good choices.
So kind of the opposite of what we have now.
The opposite of what we have now,
Yeah.
exactly.
Where we
Right
get
now,
some
it
not
could
so
go
great
either way. I
choices,
mean,
and it doesn't matter who, you have what you get, but you don't necessarily have good choices.
well, that's true. That's true. But we have a primary system, and so if 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 the people who vote in the primary in your district, for instance, if they like the wife beating criminal, indicted, whatever kind of person, then that's the person who that party is going to nominate. Whereas if the people in your district likes the kind of upstanding, moral, tells the truth all the time kind of candidate, then that's the person that your party nominates, and so that's the way it is now. So you might have a person who's like a despicable, but they're the person that gets nominated, in this particular race. That can't happen in
And council.
2046 America because of the Council of No, and the whole idea is if you have competent management, then
Mhm.
you can rein in. You'll never have like an Elon Musk kind of situation. Because the other thing about the Council of Nobles is as long as it exists, there is a taxing wealth versus taxing income tax regime.
Oh,
So
nice.
all wealth above $700 million is taxed at a
Mhm.
70%
Mhm.
as long as the Council of Nobles exists. So you can't, as long as you have it, you have that rate.
Right. You
If you
can't
try to
exclude
get
it.
rid of that rate, then the Council of Nobles disappears. That's just the way the law
Okay.
is written.
Alright.
And that's meant to rein in power. That's what it's meant to do. So,
Interesting. 'Cause,
yeah, yeah, exactly.
I've got in my novel series that's still not out, but it will be eventually, young adult novel, I've actually eliminated governments and moved everything toward it was kind of like building on not a corporate system, but on a system of projects. So you had, the food project, you've got corporate transportation project, water and everything else, all of these things where people within that project knew how that worked and had to cooperate with other groups of people for the local and larger and regional and stuff management. And then there was like something similar to, it's called a World Council, but not quite like the United Nations, but a similar idea. But the people who sit on that council are representatives of the various projects versus representatives of countries. And built into that system are, ways that projects have to work together in order to support the public or the larger good and the public good versus, the water project trying to take over everybody else. Because all the projects were interconnected. Like you couldn't have agriculture without water. You can't have transportation without food. You can't like all of these different things that they were more interconnected and had a different internal governing structure, and then within this larger council solved problems, like real problems, not power problems, but actual problems. And the whole function was to improve the personal and collective well-being of people and planet.
Well, actually, I do have a comment about that, but Anna
I know.
Casper has an excellent question, which
Okay,
is Emperor a book you've written that I can buy and read?
there you go.
And actually, Emperor is, if you go to my Substack, the Council of Nobles is one of the tabs. I've serialized Emperor as I'm writing it. So you can listen to the recordings that I've published of Emperor. I'm pretty sure I have about maybe 14 scenes up. So that's how you can, I mean, at this point, those recordings are free. Now, the thing that I am yeah, yeah, you're welcome. The other thing that I'm working on is I have a mini series that I've created using AI tools, and I'm about to publish another episode of that mini series.
Very impressive.
But Christine, you're absolutely right. The thing that makes the mini series works actually is the fact that professional voice actors 2 years ago recorded Coliseum. They record. I mean, that we cast the roles and everything, and they performed the roles and recorded the roles. And so even though I'm using AI tools, really the emotion and like the story comes alive because of these performances. And it's really evident in the scene that I'm publishing probably on Sunday or Monday,
Good.
on Vicky. But it's just amazing to me how many images and like video clips you have to create to make, to actually capture what's going on. It's amazing.
Yeah, I
So,
watched your last one, and I mean, the work on that just mind boggles me. I just can't even imagine it. But you laid the great groundwork with the live actors and the multi cast audiobook, and yeah, I'm looking forward to it. It's been fun to watch.
yeah, thanks. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm getting better at it, so I'm actually producing the episodes faster because I started working on Vicky maybe 2 or 3 days ago, and I'm almost done with it
Hmm.
actually. So I'm getting faster. But going back to you were saying though about corporations and government, what you're describing in terms of these groups of people working on projects, that's the way I've heard people talk about the federal government. Actually, Michael Lewis has a book that it's like he's not the only person who wrote it.
Yeah,
The way he describes the way the book came about is when the Trump administration came into office in 2016, the Obama administration tried to hand over all of this information and give them access to all these agencies so that their people knew what was going on and what the federal government was doing, and they didn't want it. So Michael Lewis kind of was like, "Well, do you mind if I take a look?" And they were just like, "Yeah, whatever." And so he went in and he looked into some agencies, and he had a bunch of other writers go in and look at other agencies, and basically that's what they describe is like all of this project based research and administration and maintenance that was going on in the federal
yeah,
government, and
and I
just
think
people
we've
just
learned a
don't
lot.
know about it,
Well, I think that was one of the things that we've learned throughout this process with the Trump administration and COVID and everything else, because we saw how
Right.
these agencies and things interact, which had been invisible before. I mean, because ideally, government is kind of this functional, invisible thing that helps life stay stable.
Well,
And it had
it's
done that, but then things got a little crazy. But we didn't see those things. I read that book. I love that book, but we didn't see how all of these agencies and ideas and people within those, because his book is mostly about the people who come to these agencies because you couldn't do what
right.
they did in
That's right.
private in private corporations and stuff. You needed the public service aspect to get these things out there and done and working and connecting and creating things that support all of us. And a lot of it's been undone, but I think it has made it more visible, what we're losing and maybe how we can rebuild it later on.
Well, the other thing that is impacting the way, at least the way I look at these things, is even on financial, like shows on cable news shows, there's concern about how the US financial market is operating right now, to the point where, they don't want to discredit or disparage our financial system, because these are people who ostensibly believe in American capitalism. But I've seen more and more shows where they're talking about, isn't this just gambling? They're just like, what is how is it possible that you can have, seven companies
Yeah.
borrowing money, investing in the company claims those investments as sales to justify the stock price that they have, it's like, it's getting to the point where even people who believe in the system are starting to be very concerned, because it's like, we cannot make the case that this is not gambling, that we can't distinguish this from the prediction markets, because of the way it's
Right.
operating.
Yeah.
And one thing that's coming out of those conversations is it's starting to make the whole notion of money sort of sound like a huge abstraction. I mean, of course, money is in a lot of ways an abstraction,
Yeah.
but it's an
One giant
abstraction. What's that?
Money is one giant belief system.
It is one giant belief system, but it's a belief system that serves a purpose that's
Mhm.
related to reality. So in other words, like, for years I would hear this stuff like, you would hear progressives maybe criticizing the stock market, or really what would happen is you would have people on these business cable news shows kind of criticizing progressive criticisms. So, and so they're kind of, they're couching those criticisms in ways that makes it easy for them to criticize. Like, they'll say they just don't understand what the stock market actually is. The stock market is a prediction of future earnings based on what's happening right now and historical data and so on and so forth. But you cannot describe the stock market right now as that. And
Mm-mm.
then you have all these other things like private equity and stuff like that. And also
Yeah.
you'll have the administration saying, well, the war is costing something like, $12 billion a day right now, but we think we may actually need $20 billion a day if this goes on much longer. And it really gets to the point where, kind of to the idea that corporations are actually just bureaus of the government, that
Mhm.
all this money stuff is just ways of accounting for activities, for
Mhm.
the for the investment in the activities that we need or that we want. So if we need water to be managed, between Illinois, Indiana, and other states, if we need that, then we need some way to account for the activities, the expenditures necessary to hire the people and to buy the equipment to manage those things. Or if we need, a satellite system in the thousands of satellites
Mhm.
circumnavigating the planet so that we can have the advantage over everybody else, that's Starlink basically, then we need a way to account for all of the engineering and the equipment that we buy and the manufacturing and stuff like that. And so even though Starlink is a private company right now, it's connected, as you said, to the government in so many ways, because it's being used by the US military and the Ukrainian military, and
Mhm.
who knows what else. And so it kind of makes you sort of think differently, or at least it makes it possible to think differently about, well, why are we separating all this stuff out in terms of corporations and governments, when really we just have all these things we need? Why don't we just do that? Because it seems to me that that's what China's done. China's like, look, all this money stuff is just BS anyway. What we need to dominate car markets. We need to dominate aerospace. We need to dominate this or that. We need to take over Taiwan. So these are the things we need, and we'll just figure out ways to justify the expenses that the expenditures necessary to accomplish those goals. Does that make sense?
It does. Now, like, China's approach to it, from things that I've listened to as well, has been like, they've had some interesting approaches, and this one about dominating only works until you run out of people to sell to. So
Right. That's
if
true.
you're
That is true.
so it's not actually an answer. It's sort of, the next thing that we're gonna do until that falls apart. It's kinda like the one child system. Like, that was an answer until it's like, "Oh my gosh, now we're gonna have a population collapse, so now we're gonna have to do this answer." So
Now
it's
we need
kinda
more
like,
kids.
I know. It's the same patchwork quilt. I mean, they've got a longer time horizon than we do. They
Right.
definitely do that, but
Right.
it's still sort of a patchwork quilt of looking at the next problem or two and addressing the next problem or two or challenge or two, and still not really, we don't have a council of nobles. We don't have a worldwide because of the UN they can't do this, a worldwide way of planning for all of us versus just continuing the same old, back and forth and fighting and all of that stuff. But your point to the finances, this is probably a little bit off from what you were saying because I'm not entirely on board with that way of thinking about it, but I have to think about it in order to know how I actually think about it. There's a lot at one time. But I mean, a lot of our financial system is like it is supposed to be one of the best legislated in the world, which is why we attract so much investment. We've got a lot of stocks and bonds and all of that stuff here, but it's actually one of the better ones for people to trust the administrative aspect of our market. So that is helpful for our market. Now, one of the things that was the most instructive for me in understanding money, stock market, and the flow of money through economies and power is I was a day trader for a period of time. And it didn't last for long because I got a really bad concussion and I couldn't track everything. Like before I got the concussion, I could track stuff, and it was like I was doing, commodities and things. And then afterward, I just couldn't catch up with that. But the interesting thing was, like, it dawned on me in looking for a way to, make money and be alive without participating in the buying and selling of crap and the making of a bunch of crap that nobody needs, but just for the purpose of making money, which is kind of everywhere I looked. I thought, "Oh, I could just make money." Like it dawned on me with day trading, oh, I could just make money. And then about 10 minutes later, I thought, well, there's a problem with that. There's a problem with constructing this financial system where there's so many mechanisms within it that are just about making money and not about making things. And so you have hedge fund managers that make and break companies for the purpose of making money, but, destroy jobs and things in the process.
Mhm.
You've got, monopolies that build up things, that build up their structures that actually diminish what we have. So for the purpose of making money. So there's all of these things that have taken what's possible and financialized them for the purpose of making money that actually sort of degrades the services and goods that we have.
Well, I totally agree with what you're saying, but the thing about it I understand, I kind of appreciate the fact that like you're going into this day trading thing and you actually start questioning, well, what exactly am I doing? But in terms of what you were saying about hedge funds going in and destroying jobs and destroying businesses, it's just amazing what's legal in the United States of America. I mean, I understand what you're saying in terms of the US has the reputation being a highly regulated financial system that you can trust, but that reputation is losing its luster, to be honest,
It is
because of
somewhat.
a lot of the stuff that we're doing. And
Yeah.
that began with the financial crisis in 2008. But I mean, like, as an example of what you were saying about destroying companies, it's amazing that it's legal that you
Hmm.
can buy a company, that you can put money together as a group, as a team, private equity. You could put money together, buy a company, and then borrow on behalf of that company without any connection to you. You don't have any account. You're not accountable for those loans.
Right.
And then you can, basically sell off the company, make money for yourself, and then
Hmm.
leave the company straddled with loans that you borrowed on their behalf.
Yeah. So that you get your money back and then they're stuck with the loans. Yeah. I
And
mean,
that's stuck with the loan. It's amazing that that's legal. So,
it is.
it's
Yeah.
one thing that the financial system and all this stuff, and you start wondering, okay, what's the whole point of what I'm doing? I'm day trading, but basically, this is supposed to be a system that capitalizes businesses, right? We're supposed to be
Hmm.
investing in businesses, but it's amazing what's legal in the context, in the framework of investing in businesses. And I
Yeah.
think that's
Well,
that's where these people on CSNB, CNBC,
yeah.
and
Yeah.
all these
CNBC.
other cable, business channels, that's kind of where they're just like, well, there are all these details in the system and the laws and the regulations, but we've moved away from that when you actually have companies, like 7 companies propping up the stock market, and you have all
Yes.
these other things all these other scams and gimmicks and deals like stable coins and all this other kind of stuff, that's legal. It really, that explains why the bond yields are over 5%. I mean, it's like, it totally makes sense. It's amazing that they're not higher, actually.
Well, it is because if you look at all the pieces, I mean, it's this crazy house of cards, and
Right.
you keep expecting the house of cards to fall over, and then just start creating a different little card castle over here. Because every little derivative new thing is just an unexplored way to make money that has not been taken into account legally yet. And they're very good, these companies, about finding these ways of doing things until, like the financial crisis, that nobody believed was possible because it didn't fit into the parameters of what they thought the housing market was. And but that people were finding these little loopholes and creating things that should never have been created that weren't technically illegal. And then the whole thing implodes at one point. And I think, just keep waiting for the next thing, but it's like the next leverage piece keeps coming, and they just leverage out this next piece to make it seem like there's more money in the system, or the system is creating something new when it's actually, kind of still teetering more and more on this little house of cards. All right, what are you seeing?
Well, I mean, one comment that I actually agree with that, but it's kind of a rabbit hole in a way. China is much better at capitalism than the U.S. because they don't maintain the facade of state and capital being separate. Then after that, he said, "Sorry for spamming so many comments." Actually, what I'm thinking is we just need to have this person on one of our Friday chats so that the three of
Anacostia,
us
that would
could.
be fun. That would be fun. You have
Yeah,
to
this
start
is a
reading some of Anna Casper's stuff because it can get very deep,
Well, this is
very
a
well
well, this is
thought
a
out,
this is a
very deep.
formal this is a formal invitation to you
Okay.
to join us in 2 weeks. But yeah, what you're saying is true, and I think and it's funny. I watch a lot of conversations between different people, and pretty much everybody, regardless of what their actual background is. Like earlier today, I heard a general. A retired general talking to a guy, Mario, who has this really popular channel on X. Uh, and the general was just like, we're headed for a huge financial catastrophe. I'm not an economist, but it seems obvious to me. And I mean, that's just so many different people from so many different backgrounds all see the same thing. And it
Mhm.
seems to me that really and it seems like it's kind of started because you see these headlines of, South Korea's stock market loses 9%, and the SpaceX IPO, people finally realized that they were buying
Oh my god,
nothing.
what a
And
scam that was, yeah.
yeah, exactly. I mean, you kind of fold in Twitter, you fold in Grok, and you fold in all this other kind of stuff. And it's like, what did you actually buy? I mean, it seems to me what's the thing that's going to topple the whole thing down is an exogenous shock. And it's hard to know what that's going to be because that's what an exogenous shock is. It's like this unpredictable thing that just hits. They've been able to manage the impact of the oil market,
Uh-huh.
of the Strait of Hormuz being shut down. They've been able to manage that by basically, milking the system.
Mhm.
This guy
Yeah.
in the UK has a great has a channel, and he had did this great thing about how basically every week there's a story that's told. On Monday, you tell one story, on Tuesday another story, Wednesday, Thursday, and by Friday another story, and it's every single week. And the markets react the same way every single week to on that day. You
Yeah,
know,
it is insane. You would think people would learn, but we don't really learn from that. So let me ask you a
well, but
question
is it
back to our government.
right,
Like,
right, yeah.
that was
Go
our
ahead.
conversation, right?
That's true.
Is
That is true.
so if we have this crisis, what is the purpose of government to manage that crisis on our behalf?
Well, again, just like thinking differently about money and what money actually is and the role that it plays in our lives, I'm starting to think the same way about government, because it seems as though, on the one hand, the idea of going to vote, even though in the United States, for years, the thing among people who follow politics is that the biggest constituency in the US are the people who don't vote.
Mhm.
But still, it's clear from country to country, you see these different revolutions and movements, social movements. Being able to go to the polls is actually important to people. People like that idea, even in places like Russia. Even you have voting everywhere pretty much, regardless of how the government actually functions. People like the idea of going to a poll and voting. So you're going to have that in some form, but It's the other things that seem to really cry out for some sort of major rethinking, which is like in the US, for instance, we have all these different, like we have something that looks like a democracy, but at the same time, a state like Wyoming has as many senators as California. That just doesn't make any sense. So clearly, apportioning the senators on the basis of land as opposed to population causes problems. That's clear. Same thing with the electoral college. Electing the president using the electoral college seems to be a problem. But what people may not realize is that the polls kind of showed that in 2024, if if it were basically based on how many people voted, unlike 2016, Trump actually won more votes.
Did.
So, that's not necessarily going to create the outcome you want,
Right.
but it does cause problems to have the electoral college being the way that we elect the president versus the popular vote. That does cause
Well,
problems.
so, and I'm not sure, I think we talked about this prior to getting on, but when I listened to a video by Johnny Harris, and they talked about the seeds of oligarchy, or the structure of oligarchy and the structure of democracy, both being baked into the U.S. Constitution at the same time. So we
Right.
have democracy in the sense, and this is the original. This is not like we have a little bit more direct power now, but originally it was the House of Representatives were elected by by people, because there was a lot of people based on a population. You could know the person more or less that you were electing.
Right.
But everything else was about the elite electing the elite.
Hmm.
So the senators were originally elected by state representatives, or the state legislature.
Hmm.
President was elected by God, it escaped me for the moment. What is that? The Electoral College, which was not directly elected like we do now, where it's based on how we elect in a state. Those electors are for that that side of the presidency. It
Right.
was really like those were the electors who elected the president. And
Right.
then there was thought in the original people who were creating the Constitution, like Monroe, who were like, let's remember that the whole purpose of the Senate is to keep the House is to vote out or vote down things that the House comes up with. So the whole thing was really about not letting popular opinion become the leading voice in the country. You had your popular opinion through your House of Representatives, and then they would go do crazy things, and then the rest of the structure would keep that, kind of tamped down and
Hmm.
serve the purposes of power. And we've changed that a little bit because we can directly elect our senators, but everything, like, the president assigns the judges or appoints the judges, and your representatives fold over every 2 years, so there's a lot of movement with that. But that things are really meant to keep power consolidated versus keep power distributed, because there was only originally one distributed power avenue, and
Hmm.
everything else was consolidated power.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and I agree with. I'm familiar with that history, or at least that progression in terms of things being opened up more and more and more. But at the same time, another thing that struck me recently is if you have a I mean, I know this sounds extreme, but it just seems to be true. If you have a candidate that runs on a particular agenda and you vote for that candidate on the basis of that agenda, you should be really angry if that candidate doesn't implement that agenda within 100 days, because obviously, based on what we've experienced in the last 2 years, this arrangement of Congress having a certain role, and the Supreme Court having a certain role, and the executive having a certain role is all based on agreement.
Right.
If the president basically says, "All right, well, you may say that's your opinion, but I'm not going to
Mhm.
do that."
Yeah.
I mean, what mechanism is there to actually stop him or her? And so, yeah, you might have lawsuits after the fact, but I mean,
Mhm.
if the people voted for this particular person for this particular reason, and the person tries to implement that reason, I mean, you should be angry if they don't try, because I mean, obviously this is all kind of a gentleman's agreement kind of thing, where the person is
It
just
is.
supposed to say, all right, well, you passed this law, so I guess I'll abide by this law. What if the person decides not to do it? And so that also kind of raises the whole idea, again, the question of what's the purpose of government, because we're talking about structure, like the governmental structure. But a lot of people feel like, and this is kind of the way I was going to introduce this this discussion before you sort of mentioned some of the ideas that you were thinking of. My question is do you feel like the federal government is actually doing anything for you personally? A lot of people don't feel like the federal government does anything, has an impact in their lives, at least a good one. And so if that's the case, then what is the purpose of government if it's not doing things to make your life better?
Right, and
I
I think
mean,
that is a fair question, and that is kind of the foundation of the question is what is the purpose of government to make our lives better, or is the purpose of government to I guess, is the purpose of government to serve us and to make our
mhm.
lives better in meaningful ways, or is the purpose of government to make us serve it and perpetuate the institutions and the power structure, which is
When of
how
course,
it's being operated right now.
right, exactly,
Yeah,
exactly.
and yeah. So that is kind of the foundational question, and in having 250 years of a experiment based on 18th century norms, laws, and gentlemen's agreements, because that's basically what it was, were kind of checks and balances and gentlemen's agreements. Maybe we're ready for a different kind of experiment or a different arrangement based on what life is like in the 21st century, rather than patchworking things, because we've kind of enshrined this, because even our original government was redone in
Right,
1687. So
right.
it was never like we come up with one idea and this is the holy grail. We never change it. We never do anything. And we have to like worship this particular structure. And we've changed it a little bit with constitutional amendments and different norms, and things have changed
Mhm,
somewhat that way. But we've not really looked at the whole structure and said, well, what if we were starting a government from scratch now? What are the assumptions under which we would create that? Because the original founders, the structure and the underlying assumptions were that we needed a government because people couldn't really self-govern without things going into chaos, because people were not
mhm,
all gentlemen
right.
and they didn't have those gentlemen's agreements. So they needed checks and balances. But it was really, how do you keep a structure that doesn't go back into monarchy or tyranny or some other kind of monarchy? And it was a big, huge experiment at the time, because monarchy was kind of the name of the game up until then. And so you had to sort of create something from scratch based on the assumptions of the day. And now we have a whole different understanding of human rights, of, people, of everybody, or more people as people, of how we
Mhm,
interact with other countries, of real religious interaction and freedoms, and not just, the Protestants and the Catholics and that kind of stuff. But starting from a different level of assumptions, what would we do now if we were needing to create governments? And then you did that with the Council of Nobles,
mhm.
and I was doing that with my YA thing, and there's other people out there kind of thinking about different kinds of government structures, for their fiction and nonfiction and things. But it's an interesting question to not to if you were starting from scratch, what would you do? And how would you do it?
Well, I mean, if I was starting from scratch, I mean, you know, I would be reluctant to. I don't believe that. I'm not afraid of the masses, as you said. Like the founders apparently were. They were afraid of the masses. I'm not
Many of
afraid of
them
the
were.
masses because it seems as though you're always going to have these different buckets of people where some people are going to pay a whole lot of attention to what's going on, be very concerned about the government. Treat they will behave as if they have a stake in the outcome. But then you have like this critical mass of people that are really going to have just tell me where I go, just tell me where to go, just tell me what to do, maintain order. I just don't want to feel like things are changing constantly. All I want is stability. You're going to have those types of people who basically don't want to think about it. And so this building from scratch, to me, whatever it is you start to build, it has to kind of take into account the fact that, you want to have the ability for this structure to adapt to differences in the environment and different challenges you face as a community. But at the same time, that adaptability can't be dependent upon this critical mass of people who you kind of have to nudge in
Mhm.
different directions, because, they'll say they want one thing, but then when you're like, oh, okay, well, this is one way we can get that. Well, I'm not really sure. I don't know. I got to think about it. I don't know. I mean, you just have people who are like that. you know?
Yeah.
And
Well,
so you
and
have
to
to
be fair, just to put in there, the tyranny of the masses, when they were the way they were talking about it was specifically economic. That if you have all these rich people with land and various things and kind of holding that aristocracy sort of leveling in the Americas at that point in time, and you had people that had less. It was the people who had less who would then use their power to take away from the people who had more. It's the same argument we were having now. It
yeah,
is
yeah, yeah.
exactly and
Well,
that
the
was
thing is
specifically what they're most concerned about.
yeah, but we have kind of a it's not I mean, we do have a lot of poverty in the US, way more poverty
Yeah,
than people like to admit.
yeah,
But at the same time, we have almost like a cushion. I hate to use the word middle class, but basically a bunch of people who are in a position where they feel like they're afraid of losing. They feel like change will cause them to lose more than they might gain. Even though their position may not be where they want it to be, they're just very kind of cautious, you know? And so, I mean, I actually believe that we are headed to a once in a lifetime opportunity to do exactly this, to
yeah,
start
me too.
over.
Yeah,
Because the institutional infrastructure is just basically crumbling in too many places.
it is.
Like if
Yeah,
you look at the last round of Supreme Court decisions and just the
yeah.
stuff that's happening.
And so many countries have unsustainable debt. You know, like, it's every
Exactly.
country has almost unsustainable debt. So what happens when I mean, like, one country begins to default, it's sort of a domino effect.
A domino effect. And I really believe, going back to what I was saying about like viewing money differently, if it happens across the Western world, it wouldn't surprise me at all that basically governments are like, well, everybody's broke, so what difference does it make? We'll just kind of start over. It's like, forget about all those debts. Who do we actually owe anyway? It wouldn't
Right.
surprise me at all if they do something to that effect, essentially. But I mean, what I'm saying is that to me right now, it's not so much. I know exactly what you're saying. Like wealthy people worried about poor people basically taking this stuff, taking their wealth. But
Yeah.
it seems to me right now what we have is a situation where it's hard to fix. It's hard to do incremental change because you have too many people who feel like they're going to lose too much if they buy into the incremental change. So it's almost like we have to get into a situation where it's not incremental. It's like everything's broken. So we've got to start all over, or we have a situation where a lot of these people feel this way because of the stock market. And if the
Mhm.
stock market really collapses to the point where they no longer have that cushion, now they're looking around going, wait a second, what happened? Like they weren't paying attention, all this
Right, right,
time. They have reason to suddenly want dramatic change because they've lost everything,
right.
you know?
Yeah, and then the trick is how do you create that change in a way that is more equitable versus, just enshrining the people who happen to have enshrining the haves and enshrining the have-nots in a whole new way.
And that's where I get to this thing of whatever system that is, it can't be too dependent upon like the masses. It can't be too dependent upon them because it's almost like there are too many people who are easily manipulated. There are too many people who are like, are hoarders basically. They're gonna get a little bit and then hoard that and won't step off of it. You have too many people, you have too many bad actors in the system. So you can't let it be a system where it's too easy to pull the strings of all these different groups of people, which are going to be
Yeah,
there. And so, I
yeah.
mean, what that leads me to is this question of is the question kind of moot anyway? Because in a way, people they're gonna behave as if there's some kind of, they're always going to gravitate towards some kind of order. So if you don't have a government basically fighting against the might makes right tendency that humanity has, if you don't have a bulwark to that, then, people are going to sort of want something that will give them some modicum of freedom. And as long as
And
people have
stability.
that desire to have freedom of movement, to have a freedom to not have all your stuff just taken away from you, to be abused. As long as people want those things, feel like they're entitled to those things, then government exists because the way you do that is through government, right? So in a way,
Theoretically.
it's almost like some form of government has to exist if those are the things you want. That's
Yeah,
just
but
the
you
way
can
it is.
still run a government that's a government that is based on that serves people and the thriving of people, or a government that rules people and, maybe creates like a lot of old dystopian books. You've got the structure, and maybe you've got this feeling of freedom within the structure, but it is, your function is to serve the structure
Mhm.
versus, the place where the structure serves the people. And
Mhm.
and so no matter what kind of government we have, I mean, it's either one version or the other version of those two things. And so I'm hoping that we've got those structures like that between the internet and blockchain and different kinds of things, that we have structures in place where we can demand more of a government that is one that ensures as much thriving as possible versus and serves that with people and serves greater freedom and serves, because right now, our government and a lot of around the world is about pitting people against each other to keep people fighting on that level to keep the structure in place and to keep the power in place. And so, because if you look at what billionaires most care about is holding on to their billions. They don't really care about like this policy or this policy, but they're happier when we're fighting about those policies because then we don't pay attention to them and, they can accumulate power and things
Right.
without interference.
Right.
But if we have and the structure supports that, but if we have a structure that is designed around human thriving, that people have enough that capital keeps flowing versus accumulating, all of that, then, I mean, those are just 2 different ways of looking at what could come out of the rubble of whatever might come.
Well, I'm smiling because if you're following the coverage of the recent elections in New York City,
Well, yeah.
basically DSA feels that that's what they're doing. So, uh, so
But
yeah,
we're
so
so
we
good at backlash, you know? I mean,
right, right,
we
right.
backlash our way and lurch our way from side to
From
side,
one
and it's
thing
all
to the other. Yeah.
same song, next verse, it's just it's sort of this zigzag that doesn't really get you anywhere.
Yeah, and it's kind of hard to imagine, doing the same sort of thing in other states. I mean, New York City is a specific context. So
Yes. Yeah.
so it's kind of hard to imagine what that would look like in like say Texas, you know.
But wouldn't that be interesting in Texas?
Oh, there's Tallarico, so we'll see.
Yeah, there is Puerto Rico. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, since we've had a participant the whole time, like
Anna
again,
you're still there.
yeah,
Thank
yeah,
you.
yeah. No, he's still there. I mean, he's made some recommendations. Let's see.
Okay, let's see.
I highly recommend reading "Capital as Power" by Nitzan and Bichner. I have to admit, I've never heard of that book. Another recommendation was "Read Against the Grain" by James C. Scott. I've never heard of that one. I'm not really sure what I said that's not true. Unfortunately, that was another comment. And don't look up the etymology of the word government.
Don't
So
look it
yeah,
up? Well, so of course we're gonna do that, so
that's the comment. I mean, that's the good. That would be. That's why we need
Anarch
Anna
Henry
Casper
Casper.
to
Yeah,
join us.
there you go. It'll be a very
So
deep discussion if we do that.
okay, all right. So yeah, it's been an interesting conversation. Interesting conversation. Now that I know how to get this chat up, it's a lot easier than I thought.
Oh, good.
Even though, man, it would be hard if like multiple people were actually posting to actually follow all that. But
Yeah,
I'll
everything
try
be
my
the 3rd
best.
person. Okay, well, good. I'm glad you got that together. I'm so glad, Anna Casper, that you're on. I really love your stuff. It always makes me think a little bit more deeply.
See, that's exactly why you need to join us in 2 weeks. So we'll end it there. We do this every 2 weeks. So please come and join us 2 weeks from now. And we don't know what the discussion is going to be because we don't know what's going to happen in 2 weeks.
I know. It could be a whole
It's
different world than
possible. Yeah, maybe next week we'll have the discussion because I kind of shared an experience I had with Christine with a Claude reacting to some of the work that I've been doing. So yeah, that would be interesting conversation. But we'll see in 2 weeks what we're going to wind up talking about. So yeah, thank you for joining us, and hopefully check us out 2 weeks from now.
Yeah, great. Thank you.